When Byron Donalds publicly lauded a real estate developer for revitalizing a Florida neighborhood, he didn't realize Representative Jasmine Crockett was about to confront him on behalf of a retired teacher, facing eviction because of that same developer. The moment the exchange ended, the internet detonated. Before the town hall's broadcast feed had even cut to commercial, a raw clip from a student's phone was already rocketing across social media, its view count multiplying exponentially by the second. Within 20 minutes, #PriceOfProgress was the #1 trend on X, a searing indictment of the congressman's casual cruelty. News producers, who had previously considered the C-SPAN-affiliated event to be sleepy Tuesday night filler, were now scrambling, ripping up their planned programming to insert the explosive confrontation. On cable news, split screens appeared, showing a stunned, flushed Byron Donalds on one side and a cool, resolute Jasmine Crockett on the other, holding up a single, damning piece of paper. The image was instantly iconic, a legal document transformed into a weapon of political justice. In the university auditorium's production truck, a frantic producer screamed into his headset, "Get a camera on Crockett. Where is she? Don't lose her." But she was already gone, leaving a political firestorm raging in her wake. 2 days earlier, the storm was just a whisper on a phone line stretching from Naples, Florida to Dallas, Texas. Byron Donalds was in his element, standing in the sun-drenched Naples office of Marcus Thorne, the CEO of Thorne Development Group. Thorne, a man whose tailored Italian suits and perpetually tan skin screamed new money, clapped Donalds firmly on the back. "Byron, that last round of deregulation you pushed through Congress was a masterpiece," Thorne said, his voice a smooth baritone that had charmed countless zoning boards. "Cut my preliminary paperwork by 6 months on the Gulf Shore project." 6 months. Donalds beamed. This was the kind of feedback that fueled his gubernatorial ambitions. It wasn't just about policy. It was about results for the right people. "That's what we're in Washington to do, Marcus," Donalds said, accepting a glass of sparkling water. "Get the government's boot off the neck of innovators like you. You're the one creating jobs, building a better Florida." Thorne gestured vaguely out the panoramic window, which overlooked a pristine golf course. "We're changing the face of this city. The old dilapidated properties in the East Naples Gateway, we're turning that area into a destination. Thorne Landing has a nice ring to it, don't you think?" "It has the ring of prosperity," Donalds agreed, "and that's the message for the town hall on Tuesday. Prosperity, growth, a strong future." "There might be some noise," Thorne said, a flicker of annoyance crossing his features. "A few holdouts, old-timers who can't see the bigger picture." Donalds waved a dismissive hand. "Leave that to me. I know how to handle the bigger picture conversation. It's about the community as a whole. A rising tide lifts all boats, even the little leaky ones." He chuckled, and Thorne joined him. An aide, a nervous young man named Kevin, hovered by the door. "Congressman," Kevin said later, as they drove away in a black SUV. "I did get a few calls about displacement in that gateway area. One family, the Hendersons. Kevin, every project has complainers." Donalds cut him off, not unkindly. "It's the nature of progress. Someone is always going to feel left behind. Our job is to focus on the thousands who will benefit, not the 2 or 3 who won't. Focus on the macro." Tuesday night is about the gubernatorial stage, not some local zoning squabble. It's a televised event with a Democrat. It's a chance to show the whole state, the whole country, the difference between our philosophies. We build things, they complain about it. Simple as that. He leaned back, confident. The town hall was a gift, a perfect platform to launch the next phase of his career. Nearly 800 miles away, in her Dallas district office, Jasmine Crockett was listening to a different side of the story. There was no sparkling water, no panoramic view. There was just the voice of Sarah Henderson, a third-grade teacher at a Dallas public school, cracking with desperation on the phone. "Congresswoman, I'm sorry to call you about this. It's not even in your district, but my dad, he lives in Naples, and I don't know who else to turn to." Crockett leaned forward, her pen poised over a legal pad. The name on the pad was Arthur Henderson. "Take your time, Sarah. Tell me what happened." "It's this developer, Thorne Development," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "They bought up the whole block around my dad's house. He's lived there for 50 years. 50 years he built the back deck with his own hands. My mother, before she passed, she planted a garden of hibiscus bushes that still blooms every spring. It's his home, and Thorne Development wants him. To sell, Crockett stated, her tone shifting from that of a congresswoman to that of the public defender she once was. He refused, Sarah sniffled. He told them his home wasn't for sale at any price. So they found a loophole, some obscure zoning ordinance about multi-unit conversions. They claimed his property was incorrectly zoned decades ago and that it's a blight on their new master plan. They got a court order, Congresswoman. They sent him an eviction notice. He has 60 days to get out. He's 72 years old. Where's he supposed to go? A cold, familiar anger began to solidify in Crockett's chest. This was the story she knew by heart, a story she'd fought in courtrooms time and time again. It was the story of power, dressed up in legalese, crushing the powerless, who is his representative in Congress. She asked, already suspecting the answer. Byron Donalds, Sarah said. My dad called his office dozens of times. He sent letters. They sent back a form letter about exciting new economic opportunities in the area. It's like they didn't even read it. Crockett's jaw tightened. Okay, Sarah, I want you to scan and email me a copy of that eviction notice, and any other documents you have from Thorne Development, and any letters your father sent to Congressman Donalds' office. Do you think? Is there anything you can do? Sarah asked, a fragile tendril of hope in her voice. I'm going to look into it, Crockett said, her voice a study in calm determination. I can't make any promises, but I will look into it. After the call, Crockett stood and walked to the window of her own office, looking out over the Dallas skyline. This wasn't her district. It wasn't technically her fight, but the pattern was a national disease. A developer, a donor, a friendly politician. A legal loophole, an eviction notice, a life appended. She thought of her time as a public defender, staring down prosecutors who saw her clients not as people, but as case numbers, as obstacles to a clean conviction rate. She saw the same dynamic at play here. Arthur Henderson wasn't a person to Thorne or Donalds. He was a blight, a leaky boat, an obstacle. Her chief of staff, a sharp, pragmatic woman named Aaliyah, walked in. Everything okay? Give me everything. You can on Thorne Development Group and its CEO, Marcus Thorne, Crockett said, turning from the window. I want to know every project he's built, every lawsuit he's faced, and every politician he's donated to. Specifically, I want to know his relationship with Congressman Byron Donalds. She paused. And find out everything you can about the East Naples Gateway redevelopment project. Check the zoning changes, see who approved them. Aaliyah raised an eyebrow. This sounds like more than a casual inquiry. It is, Crockett said, and see if there are any C-SPAN feeds covering events in Florida on Tuesday night. Specifically, a town hall on housing policy. With Byron Donalds, Aaliyah's research was swift and damning. Marcus Thorne was a major donor to Donalds' congressional campaigns and a founding member of his new gubernatorial exploratory committee. The zoning variance that allowed Thorne to declare Henderson's property a blight had been championed by a local board, stacked with Donalds' political allies. And yes, there was a joint town hall scheduled for Tuesday night at Florida Gulf Coast University. The topic: Building Florida's Future, a bipartisan discussion on housing and economic growth. Her opponent on stage, Representative Jasmine Crockett, they had invited her weeks ago as a prominent progressive voice on the House Oversight Committee, a counterpoint to Donalds. She had initially been hesitant to accept her schedule already packed. Now, it felt like fate. That evening, the email from Sarah Henderson arrived. Attached was a crisp PDF. Crockett opened it. The legal jargon was dense, but the words at the bottom were brutally clear. Notice to vacate. Underneath the cold, typed font was the address of the home Arthur Henderson had shared with his wife. The home where he'd raised his daughter, the only home he'd known for half a century. Crockett printed the document. The single sheet of paper felt heavy in her hand. It was more than a notice. It was a narrative of injustice. It was the price of progress. And she decided right then and there that she was going to make Byron Donalds explain that price to the entire country. She carefully folded the paper and placed it in the portfolio she would carry with her to Florida. The stage at Florida Gulf Coast University was brightly lit, a sterile setting for a political debate. 2 podiums, 2 glasses of water, a backdrop of American flags, and the university's logo. The moderator was a well-respected political science professor, Dr. Anya Sharma, known for her nonsense approach. The first 30 minutes of the town hall were exactly what Donalds had predicted: predictable. A question about inflation, which he used to decry federal spending; a question about infrastructure, which Crockett used to highlight recent legislative wins. Donalds was smooth, confident, peppering his answers with phrases like fiscal responsibility and individual liberty. Crockett was measured, pointing to statistics and specific programs. It was a standard political sparring match, civil and largely forgettable. Donalds was visibly relaxing, leaning into his podium, flashing a winning smile at the audience of students, faculty, and local residents. He was no longer just answering questions. He was delivering his stump speech in installments, testing lines for the bigger campaign to come. He saw Kevin, his aide, give him a subtle thumbs up from the front row. This was going perfectly then. Dr. Sharma pointed to a young woman in the third row, a journalism student. "Yes, you have a question?" The student stood, holding a microphone. "Thank you, Dr. Sharma. My question is for Congressman Donalds." "Sir, we've heard a lot tonight about growth and new development, especially in areas like the East Naples Gateway. But local reports suggest that this growth is leading to significant displacement of long-term residents, particularly seniors and low-income families. They're being priced out or, in some cases, forced out of their homes. How do you square the promise of prosperity with the reality of displacement for the most vulnerable members of the community?" A murmur went through the audience. It was the first question of the night that had a sharp local edge. Donalds's smile didn't falter, but a subtle tension entered his shoulders. He glanced at Marcus Thorne, who was seated in the VIP section, and gave a slight, reassuring nod. He had this handled. "That's an excellent question," Donalds began, his tone patronizingly warm. "And it's one that gets to the very heart of how economies work. When you have investment, when you have revitalization, when blighted areas are transformed, property values naturally go up. That's a good thing. That means wealth is being created. It means the community's assets are worth more." He paused for effect. "Now, is there a cost associated with that?" "Sometimes, but we can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Reason, progress has a price, and frankly, property values are going up. That's a win for the community." The words hung in the air. A few of the business leaders in the front rows clapped politely. The glibness of the answer, the reduction of human lives to a price, was jarring. Dr. Sharma, sensing the tension, started to move things along. "Thank you, Congressman." The auditorium, it was Jasmine Crockett. She hadn't moved, but her entire posture had changed. She was no longer a panelist. Dr. Sharma hesitated. "We have a lot of questions to get to, Congresswoman. I'm sure we do. But I believe the citizens of Florida, and indeed the entire country, deserve a clearer understanding of the price of progress that Congressman Donalds is referring to." A hush fell over the room. The C-SPAN cameras, which had been on a wide shot, now zoomed in, one on Crockett, one on Donalds. Donalds, caught off guard, forced a tight smile. "From Texas," he said, the word Texas carrying a slight emphasis, a reminder that she was an outsider here. Crockett ignored the jab. She reached down into the black leather portfolio resting on her podium. The sound of her hand rustling against the paper was audible in the silent room. She pulled out a single, folded sheet. "I'm so glad," she said, her voice devoid of heat, but filled with an unnerving precision. She slowly unfolded the paper. "Because I'd like to talk about a specific invoice for this price you mentioned." She held the paper up. Even from the back of the room, the bold, official letterhead was visible. "This," she said, her voice ringing with clarity, "is an eviction notice. It was served to a man named Arthur Henderson." His eyes darted from Crockett to the paper, and then to Marcus Thorne in the audience, whose face had turned to stone. Crockett took a small step forward, away from the protection of her podium, holding the document like an exhibit for a jury. "Mr. Henderson's home, the one he's lived in for 50 years, is in the East Naples Gateway. The area you just called revitalized. The area your top donor, Marcus Thorne, is redeveloping." She let that sink in. The connection had been made, sharp and lethal. Then came the final, devastating blow. She looked directly at Donalds, her gaze unwavering. "So my question, Congressman, is a simple one." She held the eviction notice perfectly still for the cameras. "Is Mr. Henderson's home the price of progress you're talking about? Because his family has lived there for 50 years and your donor is kicking him out." The silence in the auditorium, it was a physical presence, a heavy blanket that smothered all other sounds. For a full 3 seconds, no one moved. The only motion was the slight tremor in the hand of the student who had asked the question as she slowly lowered her microphone. In that frozen moment, every eye in the room, every camera lens, was locked on the tableau, Jasmine Crockett, composed and righteous, holding the white sheet of paper like a verdict. And Byron Donalds, his confident smile, dissolving into a slack-jawed mask of disbelief. The blood drained from his face, leaving behind a sickly pale sheen under the hot stage lights. His eyes, wide with shock, flickered helplessly between Crockett, the damning document, and the immovable figure of Marcus Thorne in the front row, whose expression had curdled into one of pure fury. Years of media training and debate prep evaporated in the face of such a direct, personal, and well-evidenced assault. Out he swallowed hard, his throat suddenly as tight as a vice. That's a cheap political stunt," he finally managed to stammer out, his voice an octave higher than usual. He tried to force a laugh, but it came out as a strangled bark. "This is a town hall about Florida's economy, and the congresswoman from Texas comes down here with some prop to try and score cheap partisan points. It's beneath the dignity." Of this discussion, Crockett didn't flinch. Her expression remained unchanged, her gaze as steady as a surgeon's. "With all due respect, Congressman," she said, her voice cutting through his bluster with chilling precision, "Mr. Henderson's daughter, Sarah, is a constituent of mine. She is a teacher in Dallas. She called my office because your office ignored her father's pleas for help, so while this eviction is happening in your district, the pain it's causing has reached mine. And I would argue that a man losing his home of 50 years is directly related to the Florida economy you're so proud of." The audience, which had been holding its collective breath, let it out in a wave of murmurs. A few people clapped for Crockett. She had established her standing. The ground Donalds had tried to reclaim crumbled beneath his feet. He tried a different tack, pivoting to his familiar territory of ideology. "This is what they do," he said, gesturing broadly at Crockett, trying to make her a symbol of a larger menace. "The progressive left. They don't believe in property rights. They don't believe in the free market. They want to control every aspect of our lives, tell every business owner what they can and can't do with their own property. This isn't about one man. This is about a fundamental disagreement in philosophy." "This isn't about philosophy, Congressman. It's about facts," Crockett countered instantly, taking another step forward. "Let's talk about some facts. Was able to get this eviction order because of a zoning variance. Are you aware that this variance was approved by the Naples Zoning and Planning Board?" "I don't get involved in the day-to-day minutia of local boards," Donald said, waving his hand dismissively. It was a classic, arrogant political dodge, and Crockett was waiting for it. "You don't?" she asked, her eyebrows arching in theatrical disbelief. "That's surprising, seeing as you personally recommended 3 of the 5 members of that board for their appointments last year. Just a coincidence." A genuine gasp went through the room this time. It was louder, more shocked. The student journalist who'd started it all was scribbling furiously in her notepad. This was no longer just a confrontation, it was an execution. Crockett had not come with just a piece of paper, she had come with an entire case file. Donalds was reeling. He looked like a boxer trapped in a corner, taking body blow after body blow, with no idea where the next punch was coming from. "I recommend qualified people to positions. That's my job," he sputtered, his voice losing its composure, gaining a desperate, whiny edge. "I don't control how they vote. This is a smear campaign, a coordinated attack." "It's not a smear to state. A fact, Congressman," Crockett said calmly. The contrast between his rising panic and her icy composure was devastating. "Here's another fact. Mr. Henderson is not some holdout or complainer. He's a retired teacher. He taught American history at Naples High School, just 3 blocks from here, for 40 years. He probably taught some of the people in this very auditorium. He taught their parents." She paused, letting the weight of that statement settle over the local audience. Then she delivered the kill shot. She looked at him with what could almost be described as pity. "Do you even know his first name, Congressman? You've been talking about the price of progress, you've been talking about revitalization, but you haven't mentioned his name once. His name is Arthur. Arthur Henderson." Dead silence. He didn't have an answer. He couldn't possibly have an answer. The camera zoomed in on his face, now slick with sweat. He was exposed, not just as a politician connected to a predatory developer, but as a leader completely and utterly disconnected from the people he was supposed to represent. He didn't know the name of the man whose life his policies were destroying. The moderator, Dr. Sharma, saw that the event had gone completely off the rails. The academic debate she had planned to lead was now a political crime scene. She stepped forward, her hands raised placatingly. "All right, I think we need to bring the temperature down. Congressman Donalds, would you like to respond to that specific point before we move on?" It was a lifeline, a chance to express remorse, to promise to look into it, to show some semblance of humanity. But Donalds was too far gone. His political brain, suffocated by humiliation and rage, had shut down, leaving only raw, defensive fury. He doubled down. "Respond to what?" he snapped, his voice cracking. "Respond to a character assassination. Marcus Thorne," he said, actually pointing into the audience at his donor, "is a pillar of this community. He is a job creator. He has done more to build this city than this congresswoman from out of state will ever understand. He is a patriot, and I will not stand here and allow his name to be dragged through the mud by someone who wants to turn this country into a socialist nightmare." The outburst was a catastrophic error. By defending Thorne so vehemently, he had lashed himself to the anchor that was sinking him. He wasn't just an associate of the developer anymore. He was his champion, his defender. The audience began to boo. Not everyone, but enough. The sound started in the student section and spread a low, rumbling wave of disapproval. Crockett, seeing that he had completely self-destructed, didn't need to say another word to him. She had one. She slowly, deliberately folded the eviction. Notice the crisp creases of final punctuation mark on the exchange. Then she turned away from Donalds, breaking eye contact for the first time, and addressed the audience and the cameras directly. Her voice was firm, resonant, the voice of someone delivering a closing argument. "This was never about Mr. Thorne," she said, making it clear that the developer was merely a symptom of the disease. It was never even just about Arthur Henderson. As important as his story is, this is about a simple and fundamental question that every single person in this country should be asking. Who do our leaders work for? She let the question hang in the air, a challenge to everyone listening. Do they work for the people who walk into a voting booth and put their faith in them? Or do they work for the wealthy donors who walk into a fundraiser and put a check in their hand? Do they work for the retired teacher trying to live out his golden years in peace? Or for the developer who sees his home as nothing more than a line item on a balance sheet? That's the question. She looked from one side of the auditorium to the other, making eye contact with as many people as she could. "The paper I held up is just a piece of paper, but it represents that choice. And we have to demand every single day that our leaders make the right one." The boos for Donalds were now replaced by a groundswell of applause for Crockett. It was thunderous, a release of the tension that had been building for the last 10 minutes. People were getting to their feet, first a few, then dozens, then entire sections of the auditorium. A standing ovation, not for a politician, but for a moment of perceived justice. Dr. Sharma, seeing the utter chaos, tapped her microphone insistently. "We will be taking a brief 10-minute recess," she announced, her voice barely audible over the roar. A 10-minute recess to restore order. The stage lights dimmed slightly. The C-SPAN feed cut to a generic graphic of the university logo, but in the auditorium, the scene was still playing out. Byron Donalds stood frozen at his podium, his face a mottled canvas of red and white, a tempest of fury and shame. His aide, Kevin, was trying to get to him. Pushing through the crowd of photographers who were now swarming the stage, their cameras flashing like strobe lights. Donalds looked trapped, a statue of humiliation. Jasmine Crockett, on the other hand, was the picture of calm. She took a sip of water, her hand perfectly steady. She methodically gathered her notes and placed them back in her leather portfolio, an island of serenity in a sea of chaos. Before she turned to leave the stage, she glanced towards the student section and found the young woman who had asked the question. The student was looking at her, her eyes wide with awe. Crockett gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement to shared victory before turning and walking off stage, leaving the wreckage behind her. The battle was over. The war, she knew, was just beginning. Jasmine Crockett didn't run off the stage. She walked. Each step was deliberate, measured, a stark contrast to the pandemonium erupting in the auditorium. She pushed through the heavy velvet curtain into the wings, and the roar of the crowd was instantly muffled, replaced by the frantic energy of the backstage crew. Her chief of staff, Aaliyah, was there waiting, a bottle of water in one hand and Crockett's phone in the other. Aaliyah's eyes were wide, a mixture of shock and adrenaline-fueled triumph. "My God, Jasmine," Aaliyah breathed, handing her the water. "You just set the entire state of Florida on fire." "I was aiming for one specific corner of it," Crockett replied, her voice low and steady. She took a long sip of water, the cool liquid a balm on her raw throat. She glanced at her phone in Aaliyah's hand. The screen was strobing with notifications. A silent, frantic disco of texts, emails, and social media alerts. "They're going to be waiting for us at the exit," Aaliyah said, already shifting into tactical mode. "Every reporter within a 50-mile radius is probably on their way here right now." "I know," Crockett said. "Let them come." They navigated the labyrinthine corridors of the university's Performing Arts Center, their footsteps echoing on the concrete floors. A university official, flustered and apologetic, tried to guide them towards a private exit. "Congresswoman, we can get you out through the loading dock. Avoid the situation out front." "Thank you, but that won't be necessary," Crockett said. Politely, "I have nothing to hide from." As they reached the main lobby, the scene was exactly as Aaliyah had predicted, only worse. A semicircle of reporters and photographers had formed a media scrum, held back by a few overwhelmed security guards. The moment they saw her, the air exploded with flashing lights and shouted questions. "Congresswoman! Congresswoman! Over here!" Was that a planned attack on Congressman Donalds? Have you spoken to the Henderson family? Are you accusing the congressman of corruption? The questions came like machine gun fire, a barrage of noise and accusation. Aaliyah moved in front of Crockett, trying to clear a path. One at a time. "Please, make some room." But Crockett placed a calming hand on her chief of staff's arm and stopped. She wasn't going to run. She was going to own the moment. She stood before the chaotic wall of media, her expression as serene as it had been on stage, and waited for a brief lull in the shouting. When it came, she spoke. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was clear, and it cut through the noise. "I came here tonight for a discussion on housing policy," she began, a subtle emphasis on the word discussion. During that discussion, Congressman Donalds made a statement about the price of progress. I simply provided a receipt. The simple, powerful line caused a fresh frenzy. "But are you saying he directed the zoning board to evict this man?" A reporter from a national network yelled. "I stated the facts," Crockett replied, refusing to be drawn into speculation. "Fact, the developer is a major donor to Congressman Donalds. Fact, the zoning board that approved the variance is filled with his political allies. Fact, his office ignored Mr. Henderson's pleas for help. I'm not the one who needs to answer questions tonight. You should all be asking Congressman Donalds why his donors' profits are more important than his constituents' homes. Ask him that. Ask him to say Arthur Henderson's name." With that, she gave a final firm nod, and Aaliyah plowed a path through the now stunned media gaggle. They pushed through the glass doors and into the humid Florida night, the flashes of cameras still reflecting in the glass behind them. As they got into their waiting town car, Crockett finally allowed herself to slump back against the leather seat, the adrenaline beginning to recede, leaving a profound, vibrating exhaustion in its place. She hadn't just set a fire. She had dropped a bomb, and the fallout was now radiating across the country at the speed of light. On X, the clip of her holding up the eviction notice was a force of nature. It was being reposted by everyone from celebrities and civil rights activists to high school students and other politicians. The hashtags #PriceOfProgress and #ArthurHenderson were trending globally. Memes were already appearing. The eviction notice photoshopped into famous paintings. Donalds's stunned face captioned with error 404, compassion not found. Cable news channels had completely abandoned their scheduled programming. On one, a liberal commentator was shouting with glee, "This is a masterclass in accountability. Jasmine Crockett just gave a live demonstration of what the Oversight Committee is supposed to do: hold power to account, not with talking points, but with cold, hard facts." On a competing conservative network, the mood was apocalyptic. "What we witnessed tonight was a new low in American politics," the host said, his face grim, a vicious, calculated, and deeply cynical ambush. Congresswoman Crockett, an extremist from Texas, abused a platform of civil discourse to launch a baseless personal attack against a good man. "Our sources are telling us that this Henderson individual has been offered fair market value for his property multiple times. This is nothing more than a shakedown, amplified by the liberal outrage machine." Marcus Thorne's company, Thorne Development Group, released a furious multi-page statement within the hour. It was dense with legal jargon, threatening defamation, lawsuits against anyone who repeated Crockett's malicious and demonstrably false allegations. It called Arthur Henderson a recalcitrant seller who was obstructing a project vital to the community's economic health, and accused Crockett of engaging in performative socialist agitation. The official statement from Byron Donalds' office was even more chaotic. It came out close to midnight, riddled with typos, a clear product of a panicked and fractured communications team. It accused Crockett of violating the decorum of the House, of being a mouthpiece for the radical anti-growth agenda, and bizarrely, of doing the bidding of foreign agents who wished to see America's economy fail. It didn't mention Arthur Henderson by name. Back in her sterile Marriott hotel room, Crockett had kicked off her heels and was sitting on the edge of the king-sized bed, a towel wrapped around her hair after a long hot shower. The television was on mute, flashing images of her own face, of Donalds's face, of the university auditorium. It felt like watching a movie about someone else. The exhaustion was no longer a vibration. It was a physical weight, pressing down. On her shoulders, her chest, it was the familiar crash that followed every major courtroom battle, every high-stakes hearing. The fight was over, but the cost was just beginning to be tallied. Her phone, which she had placed on the nightstand, was the focal point of the storm. It was a relentless torrent of digital noise. She picked it up, her thumb hovering over the screen. For a moment, she considered turning it off, sinking into the blessed quiet of the generic hotel room. But she couldn't. She had to know. She had to see the full scope of what she had unleashed. She opened her social media mentions first. The praise was overwhelming, a tidal wave of support that was both humbling and invigorating. "Thank you for fighting for the little guy. Jasmine Crockett is the leader we need." Finally, a Democrat with a spine. She saw that Sarah Henderson had simply posted, "There are no words, just tears of gratitude. Thank you, at Rep. Crockett." But for every message of support, there were 5, 10, 20 messages of pure, unadulterated venom. She scrolled, her face impassive, her mind cataloging the threats with the grim resignation of someone long accustomed to the sewer of public life. The messages were a vile cocktail of racism and misogyny. "You're a race-baiting C, asterisk, 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 who needs to go back to Africa." Another loudmouth black bee, asterisk, 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 who needs to learn her place. The threats became more specific, more graphic. "We know you're at the Marriott on Bayview, doctor. You think security can protect you? Someone should shut you up permanently. It wouldn't be the first time a politician had an accident. Your family in Texas should watch their backs." One message contained a picture of her parents' home in Dallas, crudely circled in red. The caption read, "Nice house. Shame if something happened to it." A cold dread, sharp and metallic, pierced through her exhaustion. This was the part the public never saw. This was the true price of progress. It wasn't just a political risk, it was a personal one. It was the fear that leached into your family that turned your home into a target. She took a screenshot of the post and forwarded it to Aaliyah with a single word, security. Then her phone rang with an incoming call, the picture on the screen, showing her mother. Crockett took a deep, steadying breath, composed her face into a mask of calm, and answered. "Hi, Mom," she said, her voice intentionally light. "Jasmine, Felicia Crockett, don't you hi. Mom, me." Her mother's voice came through, tight with worry. "I've been calling you for an hour. I saw it on the news. I saw what you did. I was just taking a shower. Mom, it's been a long night. "Say it's been a long night," her mother retorted. "I'm proud of you, baby. You know I am. You stood up there and you spoke the truth. You sounded just like your father when he would argue with the deacon board." A brief flicker of pride warmed her tone, but it was quickly extinguished by fear. "But then I made the mistake of looking at the comments online. Oh, Jasmine, the things they're saying about you, the filth, the threats. Mom, don't read the comments. You know better than that. It's just noise from people with nothing better to do." "It's not just noise, and you know it," her mother insisted, her voice trembling slightly. "These people are crazy, Jasmine. They are filled with so much hate. I see what they do to people. I see the news. Is it worth it? Putting yourself in this kind of danger? Putting us in danger?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy and painful. It was the question Crockett asked herself in the dark, quiet moments after the cameras were gone and the adrenaline had faded. Was it worth it? Crockett closed her eyes. She thought of Arthur Henderson, a man she'd never met, facing eviction from his home of half a century. She thought of his daughter, Sarah, her voice cracking with desperation on the phone. She thought of all the clients she had represented as a public defender, people with no one else in their corner, people who the system was designed to crush. They weren't just case files or political props. They were human beings, and their fight was her fight. "Yes, Mom," she said softly, but with unshakable conviction. "It's worth it. It has to be, because if people like me don't stand up and fight, who will? If we let them get away with this, if we let them crush people like Mr. Henderson without anyone even saying his name, then what's the point of any of it? What's the point of being a lawyer, or a congresswoman, or anything else?" She could hear her mother crying softly on the other end of the line. "I know, baby. I know you're right. It doesn't mean a mother doesn't worry. It doesn't mean I don't pray for your safety every single night." "I know, Mom. I love you for it," Crockett said, her own throat tightening. "But I am safe. I have security. I'm careful, and I'm not going to let them scare me into silence. That's what they want." They talked for a few more minutes, the conversation shifting to family gossip. Her mother's garden, the mundane and comforting topics that were an anchor to a world outside of politics and threats. When she hung up, Crockett sat in the silence of the hotel room for a long time. The muted television continued its silent dance of chaos. She felt the profound loneliness of the warrior after the battle, the quiet ache of the wounds no one else could see. She had won a major public victory, but the private cost was steep, a debt paid in fear and exhaustion, a price she knew she would have to pay again and again. She picked up her phone, deleted the threatening messages and pictures, and began to draft a memo to her staff for the morning, already planning the next move. The fight was far from over. The return to Washington, D.C. felt like entering the eye of a hurricane. The humid Florida heat was replaced by the familiar, oppressive dampness of a D.C. summer, but the political atmosphere was anything but normal. The storm Jasmine Crockett had unleashed in Naples had followed her north, and her office in the Longworth House office building had become its command center. The typical, busy hum of a congressional office had been replaced by a frantic, high-stakes thrum. Phones rang. Incessantly, the voices on the other end a mix of adulation and fury. Interns were sorting through mountains of mail that ranged from crayon drawings sent by schoolchildren to envelopes containing nothing but threatening, cut-out letters. Aaliyah stood in the center of the main office, directing traffic like an air traffic controller in a blizzard. "No, she is not available for a 10-minute hit on Crossfire Insurrection," she said firmly into her headset. "Yes, I saw the statement from the Florida GOP. We have no comment on their creative writing." She gestured to a junior staffer. "Toby, filter all incoming calls. Leadership and committee business go to my desk. Media requests go to Sarah." "That sounds remotely unhinged. Log it and send the transcript to the sergeant at arms." Crockett walked through the controlled chaos, a cup of coffee in her hand. Two Capitol police officers stood discreetly near the entrance, their presence a stark and sobering reminder of the vitriol she had stirred up. They nodded at her, their eyes constantly scanning the hallway. It was a new reality, an armor she hadn't asked for, but now couldn't do without. She entered her private office and closed the door, the noise dimming to a muted roar. The room was her sanctuary, lined with books on law and history, photos of her family, and awards from civil rights organizations. But today, it felt less like a sanctuary and more like a bunker. Aaliyah followed her in a minute later, closing the door behind her. "Okay, the rundown," she said. "All business. Leadership loves it. The DCCC is cutting ads with a clip. 60 Minutes wants a sit-down. So does every other network. The bad news, the threat assessment, is significant. Capitol Police are recommending a full-time detail for the foreseeable future, and Donalds' camp is going scorched earth. They're telling friendly media that they're digging into your past, your family, anything they can find. They're trying to make you the issue." Crockett sank into the chair behind her heavy oak desk. "Let them dig," she said wearily. "They won't find anything. What's the status on the ground in Naples?" "That's where it gets complicated," Aaliyah said, pulling up a tablet. "The local story is blowing up. The Naples Daily News has a reporter. Assigned full-time to the Henderson case, they're interviewing his neighbors. Former students. The community is rallying around him. People are leaving flowers on his doorstep. But Thorn Development is playing hardball. They've put up no trespassing signs on the adjacent lots and have private security patrolling the street. They're trying to intimidate him and the neighborhood." Crockett felt a surge of frustration. "And the national media?" "The nationals are focused on the politics," Aaliyah confirmed, her face tight with annoyance. "It's all Crockett versus Donalds. Democrats pounce. GOP civil war. They're more interested in the 2026 horse race than in the 72-year-old man who's about to lose his home. The human element is getting buried under the partisan bullshit." This was the trap. She had known it was a risk. The moment she made the move, she risked the entire affair becoming just another clip in the endless highlight reel of cable news combat. Another point scored in a meaningless game. Her goal had been justice for Arthur Henderson, but the machine was turning it into a story about her. She had to pivot the conversation back, but how? Going on a friendly network would just preach to the choir. Going on a hostile one would mean spending the entire interview defending herself from bad faith attacks. The narrative was stuck, hardening along predictable. Partisan lines. The solution came 2 days later from the most unexpected of sources. It arrived not as a phone call or a television segment, but as an op-ed published in the print and digital editions of the Wall Street Journal. The headline was simple and academic: "The Perversion of Property Rights." The author was Professor Julian Vance. Julian Vance was a titan in the world of conservative legal thought, a semi-retired professor from the University of Chicago's law school. His name was spoken with reverence in the halls of the Federalist Society. His writings on originalism and economic liberty were foundational texts for a generation of conservative lawyers, judges, and politicians. He was a man who believed in the sanctity of the free market, with an almost religious fervor. He was, in short, the last man on earth anyone would expect to defend Jasmine Crockett. A young aide burst into Crockett's office, waving a printout of the article. "Congresswoman, you have to see this. I don't even know what to make of it." Crockett and Aaliyah huddled over the desk and began to read. Vance's prose was, as always, elegant, precise, and devastating. He began not by mentioning Crockett or Donalds, but with a defense of the core principle of private property. "The right to own and dispose of one's property is a cornerstone of a free society," he wrote. "It is the bulwark against the arbitrary power of the state and the foundation upon which all other liberties are built. It is a conservative principle, first and foremost. It is therefore with great alarm that I have watched my fellow conservatives rush to defend a situation in Naples, Florida, that represents not a celebration of property rights, but a grotesque perversion of them." Crockett's eyes widened. This was not what she expected. Vance continued, methodically dissecting the case. "The legal mechanisms used against Mr. Arthur Henderson, the selective application of obscure zoning codes, the leveraging of a politically appointed board, not the tools of the free market. They are the tools of cronyism. This is not capitalism. It is a state-sanctioned expropriation of one man's property for the benefit of a wealthier, more politically connected entity. This is the very thing that conservative champions of property rights have warned against for centuries, the fusion of corporate and state power to crush the individual." He then addressed the political fallout directly. Congressman Donalds and his defenders have attempted to frame this as an attack on economic development by a socialist opponent. They have missed the point entirely. perhaps deliberately. The issue is not the development itself, but the means by which it is being pursued. A true free market would involve a willing buyer and a willing seller negotiating a price. It would not involve a developer using the coercive power of government, gifted to him by a political ally, to simply take what he wants. While I share virtually no political ground with Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. The paragraph stunned them into silence. Her actions on that stage were not, as some have claimed, an act of socialist agitation. They were an act of basic representation. She brought a specific, documented grievance against a powerful interest into the public square. By holding up that eviction notice, she was not attacking property rights. She was defending the property rights of the one person in the equation who had no one else to defend them. Conservatives should be deeply troubled by the actions of Congressman Donalds and his donor. To defend them is to abandon the very principles we claim to hold most dear, trading the philosophy of Hayek for the crude reality of the political boss. When Crockett finished reading, she looked up at Aaliyah, whose mouth was hanging slightly open. "What's his angle?" Aaliyah whispered, ever the pragmatist. "He doesn't have one," Crockett said, a slow smile spreading across her face. "He's a true believer. He's an intellectual who actually believes in the principles he espouses, and he just gave us the key." The op-ed was a nuclear bomb dropped into the center of the political discourse. It completely scrambled the narrative. On conservative talk radio, the hosts, who had been screaming about Crockett's ambush, were now fielding calls from listeners asking them to respond to Vance's argument. On cable news, Republican strategists who had been attacking Crockett were suddenly forced to concede that Professor Vance makes some valid points. The op-ed gave conservatives and independents permission to see the issue outside of a partisan lens. It wasn't about Democrat versus Republican anymore. It was about right versus wrong. It was about principle. The momentum had shifted decisively. The story was no longer just about Crockett's confrontation. It was about the fundamental questions Vance had raised. "The phone has been ringing off the hook," Aaliyah said, walking back into the office an hour later. "Every network wants you to come on and respond to the Vance piece." "No," Crockett said decisively. "No cable news slugfests. No 10-minute segments where I get talked over. This is a chance to have a real conversation on our own terms. What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking of that offer we got yesterday," Crockett said, a new energy in her voice. "The one we put on the back burner. The long-form primetime interview. No shouting heads, no partisan spin, just a serious journalist and a serious conversation." Aaliyah grinned. "The American Forum special with Helena Shaw." Helena Shaw was a legend, a journalist who had been a fixture of public broadcasting for 40 years. She was known for her meticulous research, her calm demeanor, and her refusal to be drawn into political games. An interview with her was not a performance, it was a deposition. "That's the one," Crockett confirmed. "Call them. Tell them we accept. This isn't about Byron Donalds anymore. It's not even about me. It's about the principle. And I'm going to lay it out for the entire country to see without interruption." As Aaliyah left to make the call, Crockett leaned back in her chair. The exhaustion was still there, a low hum beneath the surface, and the threats were still real. But for the first time since she'd walked off that stage in Naples, she felt a sense of profound clarity. The unexpected ally had cleared the path. Now, she just had to walk it. She pulled out a fresh legal pad and began to write, not a speech, but the core tenets of her argument. The principles she was preparing to defend in the full glare of the national spotlight. The television studio was an oasis of quiet. Unlike the chaotic energy of the town hall or the frantic buzz of her office, the set for Helena Shaw's American Forum was minimalist and serene. There were just 2 chairs, a low table, and a backdrop of deep, calming blue. The silence was purposeful, designed to encourage conversation, not confrontation. In her late 70s, with sharp, she dealt in substance as the cameras went live. Shaw offered a small, professional smile. "Good evening. My guest tonight is Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett of Texas, who finds herself at the center of a national firestorm following a joint town hall in Florida last week. Congresswoman, thank you for being here." "Thank you for having me, Helena," Crockett replied, her own posture mirroring Shaw's calm. Shaw began, her first question cutting directly to the heart of the criticism. "Congresswoman, your supporters have called your actions a masterclass in accountability. Your critics, even some who now concede the points made by Professor Julian Vance in his widely read op-ed, Say the Way You Did, Eton. A live stage without warning was a political stunt. That you chose spectacle over substance. How do you respond to that? Crockett had anticipated this question. She had prepared for it. She met Shaw's gaze directly. Alina, before I was a congresswoman, I was a public defender. I spent years in courtrooms representing people who had no power, no money, and no voice, and I learned a valuable lesson. The system, whether it's the legal system or the political system, is designed to absorb quiet, polite requests from the powerless. It's designed to ignore them. You can file the motion, you can write the letter. You can make the phone call, and the powerful man on the other side will simply let the process run out. His lawyers will file extensions. His office will send a form letter. Substance without spectacle is often dismissed. She leaned forward slightly, her voice imbued with the passion of her conviction. Sometimes, the only way to get a powerful man to truly listen is to make him listen. In a public room, with the lights on, where everyone can see. So, was it spectacle? Yes, it was. But it was spectacle in service of substance. The spectacle was the only tool I had to force a conversation about the substance of that eviction notice. Shaw nodded, absorbing the answer. Let's talk about that substance. Congressman Donalds' office has since argued this is simply about one man, Arthur Henderson, refusing to accept a generous fair market offer for his property. They claim Mr. Thorne's company offered him more than the house was worth. Why shouldn't that be seen as a reasonable part of economic progress? Because a fair offer is meaningless when the alternative is a legally engineered eviction, Crockett countered immediately. That isn't a negotiation. It's an ultimatum delivered under the color of law. A negotiation is when two parties of reasonably equal standing have the right to walk away. Mr. Henderson had no right to walk away. If he said no to the money, he would be removed by force. The question isn't what Mr. Henderson was offered for his home. The question is why he was never given the fundamental right to say no and have that no be respected. That's not a free market. That's coercion. The interview continued in this vein for nearly an hour. Shaw challenged, Crockett answered. She laid out the facts of the zoning board, the timeline, of the donations, the history of the Henderson family in the neighborhood. She never raised her voice. She simply presented her case, piece by piece, as if she were arguing before the Supreme Court. Finally, Helena Shaw looked down at her notes, then set them aside. She looked at Crockett, her expression one of genuine intellectual curiosity. Congresswoman, you took an immense political risk here, and, as has been widely reported, you've endured a torrent of ugly and dangerous personal threats. What is the principle at stake that you believe is so important it warranted all of this? This was the moment. The culmination of everything. Crockett took a breath, gathering her thoughts. She wasn't speaking to Helena Shaw anymore. She was speaking to everyone watching, to the powerful and the powerless. There are two kinds of power in America. Helena, she began, her voice soft but resonant. There is the power of organized money, and there is the power of organized people. The power of organized money is a loud, constant, and effective voice in the halls of Congress, in state houses, in city halls. It hires the best lobbyists, it funds the campaigns, and it writes the laws that benefit itself. But then there is the other power, the power of organized people. It's quieter. It's harder to bring together. It has a moral authority. It's the power of a community that rallies around a retired teacher. It's the power of a daughter in Dallas who refuses to let her father be erased. It's the power of a student asking a tough question, of people sharing a story online, of a law professor who sees a principle being violated and chooses to speak out. The principle that's worth the risk, she said, her eyes finding the camera lens. Is that the second kind of power? The power of people must have a champion against the first. The principle is that a person's life, their history, their home, their dignity can never be written off as simply the price of progress. Progress is supposed to serve us, not consume us. If we lose that principle, if we decide that human lives are acceptable collateral damage for corporate profit, then we have lost the entire plot of the American story. I was sent to Washington to fight for the people of my district. But my duty, as a citizen, is to fight for that principle, no matter where that fight takes me, she finished, and a profound silence once again filled the studio. Helena Shaw held the silence for a long moment, letting the words resonate. "Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett," she said finally, "thank you." 1 month after the town hall, the national media had moved on to other outrages. But in Naples, Florida, the story was still very much alive. The relentless local news coverage, fueled by the national attention Crockett had ignited, had put Thorn Development and the local officials who had enabled it under a microscope. Other families came forward with stories of intimidation. The city council, facing a full-blown citizen revolt, launched a formal investigation into the zoning board's conduct. The political cover Byron Donalds had provided was gone, incinerated. In the fire of public opinion, the breaking point came on a Tuesday afternoon. Marcus Thorn, looking haggard and visibly thinned, stood at a podium in front of his corporate headquarters. He read from a prepared statement, his usual smooth confidence, replaced by a bitter, clipped tone. He announced that, due to unforeseen regulatory hurdles and a desire to foster community dialogue, Thorn Development was indefinitely pausing the East Naples Gateway project. As a final humiliating concession, he added that all pending legal actions, including the eviction notice against Arthur Henderson, were being withdrawn. It was a complete and total surrender. On a screened-in back porch 3 miles away, Arthur Henderson sat in his favorite wicker chair, a glass of iced tea sweating on the table beside him. His daughter Sarah sat across from him, holding a tablet. They had just finished watching the clip of Thorn's press conference. The hibiscus bushes his late wife had planted were in full, glorious bloom, their vibrant pink a riot of life against the green leaves. For a long time, neither of them spoke. "He taught so many kids in this town," Sarah said softly, breaking the silence. "He gave so much, and they were just going to throw him away like he was nothing." Arthur Henderson, a man of few words, simply shook his head. He looked at his daughter, his eyes misty. "That woman," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he rarely showed. "The one on the television, the congresswoman from your city. She didn't have to do any of this. She doesn't know me from Adam." "She knows you, Dad," Sarah said, reaching across the table to take his weathered hand. The lasting echo of that night in Naples sounded thousands of miles away 2 weeks later. In a stuffy, wood-paneled room in a small city in Michigan, a city council was holding a late-night hearing. The agenda item was a zoning variance for a megacorporation that wanted to build a distribution center, a project that would demolish a block of small, family-owned businesses. The council was expected to rubber stamp it. A young woman named Maya, a 28-year-old coffee shop owner whose business was on that block, walked nervously to the public microphone. Her hands were shaking as she pulled a piece of paper from her bag. It was a printout of a news story, and the photo showed Jasmine Crockett on stage. Holding up a document, she took a deep breath and looked at the 5 impassive faces of the city council members. "Good evening," she said, her voice trembling slightly before finding its strength. "My name is Maya Torres, and I'm here tonight to talk about the price of progress. Is holding power accountable worth the personal cost? Let us know what you think in the comments below. And for more stories that go beyond the headlines, don't forget to subscribe."